This program is brought to you by Pussy Magnets.
Put a midge on your fridge with a pussy magnet.
Welcome, my lovely lumps. Or should I say lovely labs? I'm so thrilled to have you here in the Labia Lounge to yarn about all things sexuality, womanhood, holistic health, and everything in between. Your legs. Can never help myself. Anyway, we're going to have vag loads of real chats with real people about real shit. So buckle up. You're about to receive the sex ed that you never had and have a bloody good laugh while you're at it. Before we get stuck in, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm recording this, the Menang people. It's an absolute privilege to be living and creating dope podcast content on Noongar country, and I pay respect to their elders past, present, and emerging. Now, if you're all ready, let's flap and do this. Oh God, is there such thing as too many vagina jokes in the one intro? Whatever, I'm leaving it in. It's my podcast.
Don't panic, you're not broken. Your sex education was a piece of shit. Get your flaps out and pull up the couch. It's the Labia Lounge.
Hey, my lovely lumps. Happy to have you back in the lounge with me because this one is going to be coming at you with some big matriarch energy as we tackle the topic of menopause with Jane Hardwicke Collings, the founder of the School of Shamanic Womancraft, an international women's mystery school. And Jane is a grandmother, former home birth midwife for 30 years, a teacher, writer, and menstrual educator. She gives workshops on mother and daughter preparation for menstruation, the spiritual practice of menstruation, and the sacred dimensions of pregnancy, birth, and menopause. And she was the first person that I thought of when I was preparing to do a menopause episode and discuss this powerful rite of passage. So welcome, Jane. I'm so happy to have you.
Thank you so much, Freya. It's an awesome opportunity to be here and talk about this so misunderstood, important rite of passage in our lives.
Misunderstood key word. Let's see what we can do about that. So I absolutely love the nature of your work and your passion because it seems to cover all the stages of a woman's life when it comes to these rites of passage or transitions that we move through, like from menarche, our first bleed, to pregnancy and birth, all the way through to menopause. And I love this because these experiences are, like you said, so often misunderstood and vilified in the mainstream. And we're pretty much encouraged to just bypass our bodies to avoid the messiness or the inconvenience of it all. And from what I understand of your work, you're teaching women to, I guess, bring more reverence and ritual and sacredness to these transitions, to approach them as the rites of passage that they are and restore some forgotten wisdom and respect for womanhood in all its seasons, which we will get into the meat of all of that soon. But and you can probably do a better job of explaining the nature of your work. But for now, I'd love to give the listeners some context. So are you able to give a really quick rundown on some of the fundamentals, such as, menopause, what age do people generally go through it, peri-menopause, how long can these periods last, and just like a little bit of that side of things before we get into the rest of it.
Okay, so how menopause unfolds is there's some basic things that happen to everybody, but there's an individual experience for each woman, obviously, in the same way that we give birth following a same sort of unfolding, but everybody has a different experience. The average age of a natural menopause, because there's other ways of having menopause, which I'll talk about in a second, but the average age is 50, 51. And so what that means is that 5 years before your last period, and you never know when it's going to be your last period, but about 5 years, and so you'd recognize that retrospectively probably more than anything, the change begins. And the most common thing that changes is that we don't ovulate every cycle. And I know from telling lots of women that when they're, trying to figure out what's going on, that so many women have no idea about the signs of ovulation. So that would be something to make sure one knows about, so one can tell when that changes. But basically, and just quickly, that the signs of ovulation are fertile mucus, so that's what's called spinbarkite, slippery, stretchy mucus that happens around ovulation. Also increased energy and body awareness and libido. And the other thing that heralds ovulation is after ovulation, so it's useless for contraception, is that after you ovulate, your temperature goes up by 0.5, like so half a degree. So you'd only notice that if you were, taking your temperature every day to even know that. But the other thing that can be a sign of ovulation is a pain over your ovary. So when those things stop happening, that can be the heralder of the change. And the change is basically due to what's known as the first of two phases of menopause. And the first phase is about your progesterone levels lowering. So that's the one that's responsible for progest. So it's about promoting pregnancy. So what that looks like is lower progesterone looks like is the change in the length of cycle because you're not ovulating necessarily. And also progesterone is the feel-good hormone. So we don't have that sort of buoyancy that you have around ovulation and pregnancy, which can be the first thing that women notice. I don't feel so up or good all the time or whatever. So then there is a second phase of menopause where estrogen goes down as well as the progesterone going down. So the first phase with the lower progesterone means that you have a dominance in estrogen, which has all kinds of effects depending on what your estrogen levels are already, and which is dependent on the status and health of your liver and the status of your adrenal glands due to how much stress you experience. So that's kind of like the beginning of it. Now, the other kinds of menopause that women can have are surgical menopause and chemical menopause and premature menopause. So premature menopause is rare and said to be under 40. So it's rare, but it happens. And then surgical menopause is when you have your ovaries removed. So you could have a hysterectomy where they leave the ovaries in and then you still cycle. Like you don't have a womb, so you don't have blood, you don't have a period, but your ovaries are still ovulating. And so but the egg just gets absorbed into your inside somewhere.
Right.
But the cycle of winding down fertility still happens, which is what menopause actually is. So then women who've had hysterectomies younger than their menopause time may or may not, who knows, notice this happen, the menopause happen. And then chemical menopause happens when women receive drugs predominantly for cancer situations when they're trying to make the tumor stop growing. So they do estrogen blockers and it turns off the ovaries, and that's a chemical menopause. So both those things, surgical and chemical menopause, don't have the natural kind of unwinding that or slowing down that natural menopause has. So it's kind of like a bang, you're like in menopause. Yeah, which is similar to an induction of labor in birth, right? So often with inductions, they pump your body full of the artificial syntocin on the artificial oxytocin, which makes contractions, and all of a sudden, bang, you're in heavy labor. So it's the same with that surgical or chemical menopause, bang, you're in menopause. So that can often be a bit much in the same way that induction of labor can be a bit much. So often at those times in those situations, then there could be a call for some of the menopause hormone replacement or HRT to settle you down. But, taking HRT, or it's got a new name now, menopause hormonal treatment, MRT or something, just rebranding, same thing. That's a very common drug protocol that women go on around menopause because they don't like the changes they're experiencing, or they're too much or too inconvenient or too different, or they feel too different. But the thing about them is that they're not something you can stay on for a long time. I think the kind of recommended length of time is 5 years, and then you have to go through menopause. So like a lot of thinking around this, controversial, but, you know, in the kind of maybe anti-drug way of looking at it, that you still have to go through menopause at some point. So why not go through the experience when your body's ready for it rather than putting it off for however long?
Right.
So, but, you know, women will choose what they need to choose. And a lot of the way we manage ourselves through the experience, which is often called peri-menopause. So peri means around. So that means either side of it, that there won't be the things that arise for us during menopause, both physically and emotionally and psychologically, that they won't be random surprises, actually, because wherever you go, there you are. And menopause is like all rites of passage, where whatever they are, whether that's your menarche or any childbirth experiences, and every pregnancy results in a birth. Whatever ends a pregnancy is a birth. So miscarriages and abortions should be considered births in terms of what they teach us. So whatever we experience in any rite of passage is like the culmination of our life thus far, and like a readout of our mindset, our beliefs, attitudes, and fears. So one of the things to know about menopause is we can't blame everything on menopause. You know, menopause is the culmination of our life thus far, and one rite of passage leads to the next. So they're not random things. They're like, oh shit, it's that. I have to face it, for example.
Yeah. And I feel like the mainstream view of, or, you know, our sort of societal view of menopause that we see in the media, in our culture, is that it is this, you know, it does get blamed a lot. It's you know, it's this negative experience. It's going to be challenging. You're going to be moody and lose your libido. Your vag is going to dry up and atrophy. You'll get hot flushes. Basically, it's like, oh, look, your life and your use as a woman just shrivels away with your ovaries and your ability to bear children. And it's very much approached from this disease model where it's something to manage and fear and dread. And I'm wondering if you feel, because I feel, I mean, I haven't experienced it yet, but I feel like this would affect the way that we then actually experience menopause when this is the narrative that we've been brought up with and surrounded by around it, right?
Exactly. So, like, there's the first clue. Anything to do with the feminine or women that's put down, hidden, made a joke of, or feared is a clue that it holds power. You know, think about all the things that fall into that category: menstruation, menstrual blood, childbirth, menopause. Like, they're places and times of massive power for us. So naturally, in a patriarchy where the objective is to oppress women and the feminine, then the places and times and parts of our power like this are turned into something else and a way to control us, which sucks and sounds bad, but get with the program. It's actually what's going on.
It's happening.
It's happening. And so there are also so many other ways on the planet right now that menopause is perceived. So here's an ancient Native American, First Nations American saying: at menarche, so that's first period, at menarche, a girl meets her power. Through menstruation, she practices her power. And at menopause, she becomes her power. Becomes her power, right? And in traditional Chinese medicine, which is much more ancient than modern Western medicine, menopause is called the second spring. So, you know.
Oh, I love that.
Exactly. So
yeah, TCM.
Reframe, you know. So the experience we have at menopause is not just about the winding down of our fertility. It's also about, so the experience, and I'm purposely not saying symptoms, because that implies it's a disease process, right? And it's not a disease process. Every woman will go through menopause. So the experience that we have is directly related, as I said already, to the status of your liver function and how stressed you are. In other words, your adrenal function. So part of what happens in menopause is our body adjusting to the changing hormone levels. So, which our body's already well practiced at doing through the menstrual cycle. So the liver plays a huge role in basically metabolizing excess estrogen in time for the next menstrual cycle so that it's down low enough to be able to start the cycle again. So at menopause, it's a similar process where the body has to get used to less estrogen, basically. And so the estrogen that's in your body needs to be metabolized and turned into its, bits, whatever it's made of, and used or just excreted or whatever. So, and the liver does that. Now, if your liver is busy doing other things that it prioritizes before metabolizing estrogen, and that two main things is any poisons that your body has to move out of you, because otherwise they're going to poison you. Alcohol is a poison and will be prioritized over estrogen, and cortisol is a poison to our body and it will be prioritized over estrogen. So when your body has to break down alcohol and other drugs and cortisol, then what it does is it parks the estrogen that it's supposed to be breaking down so that you can have a healthy menopause or a healthy menstrual cycle. It parks that estrogen into your fat and then comes back and gets it later when it's finished doing all the other things. But if you don't have enough fat, then your body will make fat so that it can store the estrogen. So that's a huge thing to know. And it encourages us to actually prepare for menopause. So the worst thing one can do is arrive splat, a drunken stresshead, into menopause. And I'm exaggerating, but there's a lot of women like that. Yeah. And your symptoms, your experiences are going to be much more intense and severe.
Yeah.
So
so many people go through their whole lives under so much stress now and putting so many toxins into their bodies, endocrine disruptors and poisons, as you said, like alcohol and things. And our cycles are fucked. And we've probably never had, so many people probably have never had a particularly healthy, regular cycle. And so they've been sort of parking that estrogen all the way along. And then they arrive at menopause just so in the red that, of course, it's then going to be this, quite challenging experience. So, and we just don't get taught about this, the liver and the adrenals, and like stress is just the most insane, like, what do you call it? The antagonist. It's a bad guy. It's the biggest bad guy. But no one quite takes it seriously, in this sort of like go culture that we're in. So, and then of course, like I like to sort of refer back to what I was talking about earlier with the attitudes and beliefs and the stories and narratives around menopause being this thing that's to be feared and dreaded, and that lowers our worth as a woman, because we're no longer these fertile childbearing beings that have this this purpose and potential. That is a fucking stress. All this patriarchal bullshit, that is a stress that we're also internalizing. So that would then affect our experience of menopause.
Totally. So evolutionary biologists asked the question a little while ago, why would human women live beyond their fertility? What could possibly be the use of them? Now, I see you raise your eyebrows. Exactly. What a fucked up thing to even imagine to think.
Oh my God.
So they did the research. They went to nature, as evolutionary biologists do, to figure out why, in this case, why human women would live beyond their fertility. And what they found is that there are only 5 creatures on the planet that go through menopause. Human women and pilot whales, orcas, beluga whales, and narwhals.
Oh, wow. Oceanic. Not what I was expecting. I thought you were going to say bonobos or something predictable.
Yeah. So no. So only us and them, those 5 creatures. And so they looked at those toothed whales, as they're called, to figure out, well, why do they live beyond their fertility? What's the use of those? And what they found, and clearly this is the blueprint for mammals who go through menopause, what they found that the post-reproductive grandmother whales did or were was that they were the bosses. They were the leaders of the pods. And because they were there, because they were leading their pod, what happened was that their daughters and sons lived longer, more babies were born, and their grandchildren thrived. And that was because her age and experience, her wisdom, the wisdom of the post-reproductive grandmother, whether she's had babies or not, is what is required by the younger people.
Yeah.
So the blueprint, the use, the function of postmenopausal women is to be the leaders of their community. So just imagine for a moment what would happen if that were the case.
That makes me think of a quote. I won't remember the exact quote, but it was from a book called Cunt, Inga Muschio. I don't know how to pronounce her last name. And she's talking about how we need to have grandmothers in parliament and how we need to just be run, our society needs to be run by grandmas, because it's like, well, they're not sort of at the whim of fluctuating hormones any longer. They don't have to rear children anymore, but they have had the experience of rearing children and grandchildren, and they've got the wisdom. They live, we live longer than men. And just that kind of grounded grandma energy. She was like, that's what we need to be running the world.
Totally. And that's what's going on in the whale world. So our whale sisters lead the way, and we just have to catch up and realize that we are mammals, which means we're just a certain kind of animal. And, I think if we remembered that, so many things would make so much more sense, including what the role of the postmenopausal woman is. So we live in this patriarchal culture that's fixated on youth and beauty and instant gratification and 24/7 availability and go, 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 which is not what the cycle is, which is what runs everything. And hence we're in this fucked up situation that we're in because we've pretended that we don't live in a cycle. And women are the cyclical beings extraordinaire, and menopause is part of that.
Hey, Babe Towns. So sorry to interrupt, but I simply had to pop my head into the lounge here and mention another virtual lounge that you've got to get around. It's the Labia Lounge Facebook group that I've created for listeners of the potty to mingle in. And there you'll find extra bits and bobs like freebies or discounts for offerings from guests who've been interviewed on the podcast, inspiring and thought-provoking conversations, and support from a community of labial legends. I also have an account on the fab new app Sunroom, which is a platform created by women for women and non-binary folk, and where there's no shadow banning or censorship of sex-positive content, unlike with the other platforms that I'm on. So you can hit up my Sunroom for extra content and real and raw life updates, because I'll be sharing on there from now on all of the stuff that I can't post anywhere else. My vision for both of these is that they become really supportive, educational, and hilarious resources for you to have more access to me and a safe space to ask questions that you can't ask anywhere else. So head over to the links in the show notes and I'll hopefully see you in there. And now, back to the episode.
Yeah. Big time. Well said. Oh, that's a soundbite if ever I heard one. I've had goosebumps on 3 separate occasions so far in this interview. So thank you. I'm very stoked about that. That's a good sign. I'd love to touch on something that people commonly refer to as like a symptom of menopause, and that is our libido's dying. And I've actually there's a bit of research around this that shows that actually a woman's relationship satisfaction, attitude towards sex and aging, cultural background, overall mental and physical health, all of these things have a far greater impact on her sexual functioning than does being in menopause. So do you have anything else to add to this just to reassure people like, hey, don't worry, old people still love sex. You're not just going to totally like wither away, and because that's something that people always talk about is like the loss in libido, and the hormones, like chemically you have shifted, but the sort of research is showing that actually no, it doesn't actually impact your sex drive as much as everyone seems to believe. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that again we can't speak generally here because there's so many things that impact our libido. And one of the things is, like, people have studied libido and there's some great books about it. But one of the things that I learned was that one of the main factors that influences your libido is threat. Yeah. So if you're in a long-term committed relationship where you trust each other and there's no threat, then libido goes down because it's not associated with threat anymore. So there's a comfort that moves into a long-term relationship where threat is not part of libido. So in a long-term post-reproductive relationship, so we're talking post-menopause, there needs to be a different reason to connect physically, to have sex, basically, especially when, for probably most of the relationship, what's been driving the libido, besides threat, is the fertility, because fertility enhances libido, of course. So women have basically two times in their cycle when their libido peaks. And the first time is at their ovulation, so which is usually midway through the cycle. And that's obviously connected with the whole kind of purpose of libido is to get pregnant. And when you're ovulating, you're fertile, so your libido increases. And then the other time that classically women have an increased libido is just before they bleed. So they're very different libidos, though. So the libido associated with ovulation is like a fuck me. And the libido associated with just before bleeding is more like, I'm going to come and fuck you. So I can hear you laughing silently there, but that is, that's the case. Yeah. So then when you're going through menopause, it's like the closest thing that I could have experienced to going through menopause is breastfeeding a newborn baby. It's very similar to that kind of disturbed sleep, therefore tired, therefore everything that goes along with tired, like mood and weird eating habits and all that kind of thing. And so often when women are navigating the hormonal changes in the same way that women navigating life with breastfeeding a baby every couple of hours during the night, like sex might well be the last thing on your mind.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that's a bad thing. It means there's other things that are more important than that. It doesn't mean that you might not feel like you want to pleasure yourself, because that's kind of a different thing and will be like associated with however often or whatever habits or not you've got around that kind of thing. But in terms of connecting sexually with another person, and let's assume we're talking heterosexual relationships here, because lesbian relationships around sex and menopause are completely different, totally different. It's a whole other story. And I've had many chats with lesbian women around menopause, and I mean, clearly there's all the stuff that you go through emotionally and psychologically, which impacts everything. But lesbian sex is not about responding to a penis, right? It's about coming together in a different way for the purpose of pleasure, right? So in a heterosexual relationship around menopause, the other thing that happens that really affects libido is the decrease of estrogen. So I know I'm talking about lots of other things besides libido, but that's the point, right?
No, it's all relevant, yeah.
Yeah. So at menarche, our first period, the veil of estrogen descends upon us. So we become under the influence of estrogen for basically 40 years. So we have our menstrual cycle for about 40 years. So estrogen is known as the hormone of accommodation and sacrifice. So this has us accommodate other people's needs instead of our own, and even before our own. And it has us sacrifice ourselves for whatever or whoever we have to look after. Now, obviously our children, which is a biological imperative, and why this is all happening. And we are richly rewarded for it. Like we feel good, we make other hormones which make us keep doing that. And so at around 5 years before your last period, when everything starts to change, this veil of estrogen, remember the hormone of accommodation and sacrifice, begins to rise. And then instead of like, oh, whatever you want, honey, it's like, why the fuck am I the only one who does anything around here? So if women have been accommodating their partners for however many years and doing whatever they think they have to do to meet his needs, when this hormone of accommodation begins to wane, one of the first things they're going to be thinking is, what the fuck am I doing all the time? I'm not even thinking about myself here. 40 to 60% of divorces happen at menopause initiated by women. This veil of estrogen. What the fuck am I doing here? Or who are you? Or who am I? Like when the hormone of accommodation and sacrifice shifts, everything changes. And women feel different and they act differently. And the people around them are like, who are you? You've changed. And, the answer has to be, well, actually, yes, I've changed. So that's all going on, as well as any kind of wondering about libido. And then the other thing, the good thing is that you're much more likely to do it when you want to rather than when you don't want to. And due to the relative increase in levels of testosterone, they don't actually go up, but compared to estrogen and progesterone, it's higher than it usually is in relation to that. So orgasms post-menopause are longer and stronger.
Ooh. Hello. Okay.
And apparently the clitoris keeps growing.
What? Oh my God.
Yeah, apparently. So the other thing that we meet at around menopause in terms of our libido is the fractal connection to our first sexual experience.
Oh, wow.
So whatever starts something affects what unfolds. And then menopausal sexuality is like a reset, because you have to be choosing other than conceiving purposes for having sex. So pleasure, intimacy, connection. So one's perception and relationship with pleasure and connection and intimacy at menopause is going to be directly related to however we were initiated into that in the beginning.
Wow.
So 2 to 3 out of 5 people are sexually abused as children. So if your initiation into your sexuality is like abuse, then that affects you forever, but it will most definitely show up around menopause when all of these things are being revisited. Because menopause is not just the winding down of your fertility. To quote Dr. Christian Northrup, it's the mother of all wake-up calls. Everything you have swept under the carpet comes out at menopause, and it is the rite of passage designed to heal all the unhealed parts of us. So we're ready at menopause to face things we often have been ignoring or have actually forgotten, buried. And so much else is going on than a decrease in libido. So of course, but the focus is on that, right? The focus is on decreased libido and dry vagina, like dry. It's not dry. Like dry means like not wet, right? If any perimenopausal woman puts her finger in her vagina, it's not like a desert. It's just like it's like the inside of your mouth. It's like it's a wet, moist area. But what does change due to the hormones is the thickness, the plumpness of the tissue. Like that's happening everywhere on the body. Like, you can see my face. My face is like an old lady's face. And that's because of estrogen, because like looking at your face is plumped up by the amount of estrogen that you have in you, even your hands, like the skin, like it's about estrogen. It's not about becoming dry. You know what I mean? So we just choose all the worst ways of describing things to imprison women in this belief that, which is cultural, that if you're not, basically our culture idolizes the 25-year-old or so woman, the sexually available, beautiful, plump, pre-ovulatory, orgasmic creature. That's what all the ads have. That's what all the ideals are, Yummy mummy gets her pre-baby body back in whatever. Everybody has been led to believe in our culture, including young girls, like little girls, that the best way to look is like Barbie doll kind of thing. And I say that because you know what I mean by that. And so
totally.
So for women at my end of the spectrum, like I'm 8 years past my last period, which was not until I was 56 either. So, I'm 64. And, like in my like growing up gang of girlfriends who I still see, I'm like the experiment of what happens when you let yourself go, so to speak. Like I don't dye my hair. I've got I've had no plastic surgery. I don't use Botox, and I'm not on hormone replacement therapy. So I'm actually like the example of what it looks like if you actually have a natural life, so to speak. And I don't mean that in any way of judgment. I mean, like just like when it unfolds in the way that it unfolds.
Totally.
And, like I'm a bit of an odd one out in many of the circles, not the circles that I work with or but in the patriarchal culture, like I think one of the main complaints or fears or experiences of postmenopausal women is, and they say it all the time in different ways, I feel invisible.
Yeah.
because they don't look like that 25-year-old anymore, and invisible to fucking who? The men on the street in the work clothes, like, who are whistling, like, phew, like, hello and hooray to not be bloody perved on anymore. But because that's like the measure of our visibility is how hot we look or not. Like, for fuck's sake, that's so far.
Yes. Yes.
And menopause women, menopause women cannot compete with younger women for sexual attractiveness, and they're not supposed to be.
Exactly. That's the fucked thing. The feeling of the need to try to compete with that and keep up the collagen, and it's just like, oh my God, it breaks my heart.
Excuse the interruption, my loves, but I'm shamelessly seeking reviews and 5-star ratings for the potty because, as I'm sure you've noticed by now, it's pretty fab. And the more people who get to hear it, the more people it can help. Reviews and ratings help me curry favour with the algorithmic gods and get suggested to other listeners to check out. Plus, they make me feel really good and appreciated as I continue to pour my heart and soul into creating this baby for you. And I promise I don't mazz over them or anything. I mostly just tuck them away for a rainy day when I'm filled with self-doubt and existential dread about being self-employed, which is fairly frequently. So you see, leaving a review really does make a difference, and it's an easy little act of support that you can take in just a minute or two by either going to Spotify and leaving 5 stars for the show, or writing a written review and leaving 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts. Choose your poison, or if you're a real overachiever, you could do both. Whoa now. If you are writing a review, though, just be sure to only use G-rated words, because despite the fact that this is a podcast about sexuality, words like sex can be censored and your review won't actually show up. Lame. Anyway, oh, what was that? Oh, you're going to go do it right now while I wait. Okay. Yeah. No, that's a great idea. May as well just quickly click that 5-star button before we get on with it and, forget about it and get on with your day. I'm hearing them roll in. I'm hearing those 5 stars. Oh my God, I make myself cringe. Anyway, thank you much, Lee. You're a total gem, and I'll let you get back to the episode now.
Something that I wanted to chuck in was I did an episode on libido recently. For anyone that's interested in going deeper into that, I think that came out a few weeks ago, and that was a ripper. And there's a lot of stuff in there that no one realizes or thinks about libido, because it's also there's a lot of misinformation about that. So everyone feel free to listen to that. But I was also reminded of a cool fact that I read about the sort of hormonal, so FSH and LH, that are neurotransmitters. They're sort of generally around ovulation. When you're most fertile, it means they make you more open to new ideas and like tapped into a source of creativity and energy and feeling open and receptive. Like that's maybe a familiar experience for those that ovulate. And in menopause, those neurotransmitters permanently stay elevated for the rest of your life. So it stands to reason that post-menopause, we would also have access to more of that sort of action of like openness and receptivity and creativity and the flow of new ideas and wisdom. And, so that's fucking cool.
Yeah, and the way that's mostly experienced is increased visionary capacity and increased intuition, which is the experience of the postmenopausal women, and that is attributed to that LH and FSH increase and staying there.
Epic. Yeah, and
which
that's
makes
right.
sense, right?
Yeah, it makes it totally.
We need these grandmas out there, bloody knowing what's going to happen and bringing it.
Yeah, exactly. Something else I was like having all these thoughts as you were talking, like, oh my God, I've got to remember to say this. Another thing that I was thinking was, I guess we've sort of already touched on it, but this whole thing around like when you enter menopause, it really depends if if you're in a healthy, happy place, if your physical and mental health are in a good place, then that will affect the experience. And those are things that affect libido enormously as well. So like, yes, maybe it looks as though when you hit menopause, your libido takes a nosedive, but actually, like, research shows that if you are healthy and happy, that is definitely the key, then there's no significant decline in libido or sexual satisfaction or ease or difficulty reaching orgasm or even genital responsiveness, and like, that's kind of massive because we do view it as like, oh, like, yeah, libido dives and blah, blah, blah. But there's actually so many other factors that impact that more so than menopause. But I think it's just become so normalized that we are all pretty unhealthy and pretty sort of in a rut, and we've been stressed our whole lives, and we have all of these like toxins. I don't know. I get pretty sad when I think about just the sort of average state of health that like your average woman is in, and the amount of menstrual problems and difficulties with, hormones and this and that. And it's because of the lifestyle that we lead, so then it's all getting blamed on like, oh, she's just on her rags, she's got her period, oh yeah, going through menopause. It's like, well, those things are not inherently problematic or challenging. It's actually the lifestyle that you're leading that, and these things are actually just barometers, like your period and menopause. It's like, how well have you been taking care of yourself? Not that well. Oh, you're going to have a bit of a shit one now then,
Totally, exactly. So that's it. We can't be blaming menopause on all of this. And the other thing that shows up in menopause is your experiences of having babies, because, one rite of passage leads to the next, and you are the one you have like now prepares you for the next one and the next one and the next one. And so when women are having traumatic birth experiences, like, no surprises that all comes out at menopause, and it all comes out purposefully so that we can heal them. And if you don't go deep into them, then it just ends up being turning off to it and the healing opportunities of it, and just believing your body doesn't work, for example. So, like, and the amount of menstrual pathology that we are experiencing as a sisterhood is like through the roof and increasing all the day, every day, I mean. So endometriosis, polycystic ovary, and infertility are all menstrual cycle pathology. And that's like increasing all the time. And like you say, our lifestyles, but the pollution, we live in a world that is polluted by estrogen and plastic, which pretends to be estrogen. So, it's not going to be pretty.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't touch receipts, everybody. Massive sources of BPA, endocrine disruptor. It's going to fuck your period up. It's everywhere. It's like as soon as you start looking out for endocrine disruptors, you're just like, oh my God, no wonder my period's messed up. No wonder I've got PCOS. It's just almost unavoidable. Anyway, that's a whole other podcast episode. I have done, if anyone's curious about, the stuff we were talking about around knowing when you ovulate and this menstrual awareness, I've done an episode on fertility awareness and menstrual cycle awareness and stuff from ages ago with Dr. Madeline. But I want to jump in with the segment Get Pregnant and Die.
Don't have sex, because you will get pregnant and die. Don't have sex in the missionary position. Don't have sex standing up. Just don't do it. Promise?
Before I've just gotten so carried away. There's all this, I love talking about this stuff. But before we get back into the meaty stuff, let's do Get Pregnant and Die. So do you have a story for us around your sex education that you'd like to share?
Well, I think that it wasn't really a thing when I was growing up. I remember in high school when I was probably 14 or 15, I went to an all-girls high school in Sydney, and they sat us down in a dark room and showed us a movie of women having babies to scare us out of getting pregnant.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was really about it.
Yeah.
And I think that, like, I didn't learn very much at all. It was all just experimenting, as I grew up. But one of the things that I did learn recently, which I am so blown away about and want to share with everybody and do share with everybody, is the actual size of the clitoris. And if we were doing visual here, I would show it to you and tell you that you can buy an anatomical model of a life-size clitoris and it barely fits in your hand. It's gigantic. The clitoris has more erectile tissue in it than a penis. And if you imagine your genitalia and your vulva, your labia majora, the outside parts of your vulva are full of clitoris, and it has wings out the side that kind of go towards your legs and up inside your vagina. It's gigantic. And this is a recent discovery by a female gynecologist in Melbourne, Dr. Mulligan. So if you Google life-size anatomical image of the clitoris, you can actually buy them as well. And I suggest everybody reacquaint themselves with this amazing part of our anatomy. And that's what I would offer. But the other thing, just quickly, clitoris is its own name, but sadly, a lot of the parts of our female genitalia are named after men. After the men who discovered them. And I think that's a really important thing for us to remember, like fallopian tube or Bartholin's gland or the G-spot or they're all actually little flags in our anatomy with a man's name on it, which is fucked.
Totally.
Colonized bodies.
Oh, God. It's so grim. Colonized bodies. Fuck. Yeah, thank you for that. I've definitely heard people rebranding, the G-spot, which is Grafenberg, named after Grafenberg, as like the goddess spot instead. And, people giving them other names and things. So that's nice. Do whatever you need to do to reclaim.
Yes.
So something that I've got a little quote that I wrote down that I really love, and it sort of leads into my next line of questioning. But the quote is from Tamara Slayton, and it's, "Menopause, when understood and supported, provides the next level of initiation into personal power for women. I think of the peri-menopause and the 20 to 30 years following menopause as a time of ripeness. Instead of rose buds, we become rose hips, juicy fruit that contains and nurtures the seeds we will sow later." And I feel like, we have talked about this a bit, but I'd like to give it a bit more space, because I feel like, contrary to societal conditioning, you're just getting started in menopause in a lot of ways, like rather than just declining into irrelevance and aging and unworthiness and infirmity and dry vaginas, So, I think some of the ways that, and not talking from experience, just I'm a nerd about it and I love reading about it. But some of the things, menopause actually frees a person up for is, like you were saying, like living like an even more rich and authentic life, being so much more true to themselves and their own needs, not doing the people pleasing sort of ease and appease shit anymore. Childbearing's over, so there's newfound energy to put towards doing what she actually wants to do, less tolerance for bullshit and relationships and careers and just aspects of life that don't serve her or feel nourishing or fulfilling. The hormonal sort of swings or the mood swings and up and downs of having a cycle cease. And so like hormonal balance is restored, which means we're more stabilized and free than ever before to pursue like a purpose and live life for ourselves. These are the things that I've kind of read about where I'm like, oh my God, that makes so much sense. Have you experienced that? Do you see that? Or are you more sort of coaching women to actually see it that way and start to take advantage of these benefits? Or have I missed any? Like, what are your thoughts on that from actual experience?
Totally. So I think another way for us to understand what happens in menopause is that menopause is the beginning of the autumn season of our lives. So from
beautiful.
0 to 25, it's like the spring. From 25 to menopause, it's the summer. And then from menopause till about 70, it's the autumn. So that in and of itself explains the purpose and the role of that season. So, it's about the harvest. It's about sharing your harvest. It's actually our responsibility. And if we just go back to the whole whale story, there's a role to be fulfilled. And so I think that it's part of like eldership, and so many people are complaining that there's no elders, but they're just ignoring them, and they're hiding in plain view, or the elders don't realize they're elders. But another piece I would add to this is that I learned from one of the amazing Aboriginal elder women who teaches about their rites of passage and stuff. And I sat with her and I asked her about menopause, and said that, like, in our Western world, we're led to believe that we need to renegotiate things for menopause. We need to kind of figure out different ways of being with things so we can get back into it or whatever. And she said, no, that's not what it is. She said, I don't know any women, Koori or white, who are ready for the honor of that rite of passage. She said, it's not business as usual after menopause. Postmenopause is a whole new role. It's not renegotiation. It's a whole new role. She said the role of the Mimi, which is their name for that, is to weave the dreams for the grandchildren.
Oh, goosebumps.
Yeah. So, that's what Min Maya said. And I feel that, and I see that as our responsibility, and what that looks like for me is that I want to be that old lady who the grandchildren or great-grandchildren say, Grandma, what did you do back then in the 2020s when it really mattered what you were doing and how it would impact us and the earth that we were going to inherit from you? What did you do? So I'm going to be one of those people who says I did everything I could to ensure that, the earth was going to be okay for you. And, who knows whether that works or not. But I feel like my experience on the other side of fertility is similar to how you explained it. I'm much more stable. My hormones aren't going as far up and down as they do in a menstrual cycle. And I still have a cycle, like everybody who doesn't have a cycle for whatever reason, pregnant, breastfeeding, a man, a postmenopausal woman, their cycle is the lunar cycle. So I'm much more connected to the cycles around me than the cycle that was driving my life. And I have therefore got more energy, and it's a gentler process than a menstrual cycle. And so I feel like it's different post-menopause, of course. And before I came to menopause, I thought, oh my God, it's never going to be okay. I'm so attached to my menstrual cycle. I love my blood. No. But actually, it's different in a whole new world. And as a midwife, I didn't think that there could possibly be anything more transformational than giving birth until I went through menopause.
Wow. Huge call. Wow. So fucking cool. I'm so glad I've got you on the podcast. Oh, wow. All right. Well, I'm slightly conscious of time. Do you have another 10 or 15 just to wrap this up?
Certainly.
Okay, beautiful. So I'm wanting to know how, in your work, how do you support people through the transition of menopause, aside from helping change their beliefs about it, which I guess is probably a gigantic part? Is there anything else that might be super practical and helpful for the listeners with regards to making it a smoother journey and making the most of its gifts?
Absolutely. So this arcs back to the whole concept that I said that, you can't blame everything on menopause. So how I help women prepare or make sense of their experience, or retrospectively make sense of their experience, is to remind them that one rite of passage leads to the next. So to do a real kind of archaeological dig into your past. So the first thing you want to know is, how were you born? And figure out what your birth imprint is and how that's been playing out all your life. Go into your into your childhood trauma. Like, how were you traumatized or wounded as a child? Because that's happening all the time. So deal with your childhood trauma. Remember your menarch and understand that whatever happened at your first period taught you how you're supposed to behave as a woman. And a message was given to your maiden self about how you're supposed to behave. So usually the experience is, don't make a fuss, hide your period, pretend nothing's happening, and whatever you do, don't leak or you'll shame us all. So that gives us a message about being a woman, like, you're not important, ignore your body, and don't let anybody know if you're not feeling okay, etc., whatever. So she who was initiated into womanhood at menarch is the woman who shows up to give birth, completely brainwashed by how she's supposed to behave, like roll over and do what the experts tell you. So just quickly, the most important things one needs to remember to navigate menopause is what your experiences of giving birth taught you, because one rite of passage leads to the next, and that's what is preparing you for menopause. So this goes for women who haven't had babies as well, because when we're in the summer season of our lives, we are the creatrix, and we conceive, gestate, birth, and have to look after all manner of things besides humans, careers, projects, businesses, gardens, whatever.
Yeah.
And each birth, so this is the thing to prepare for menopause, chronologically record all your births. Now, if you haven't had babies, do your careers, etc. But if you've had babies, and including abortions and miscarriages, write down the stories chronologically, and then go to the first one and ask yourself, what did this teach me about myself? And it could be something you had to draw on from deep within you to actually, go have the experience, or it could be something you didn't have or didn't do. So just as a quick example, my first experience of giving birth taught me about surrender, because I didn't surrender. Often women can learn about support because they didn't have any, for example. So figure out what each one taught you. But before you go to the second one, you have to ask, did I take the teaching of the first one to the second one, or did I have to have a repeat performance to learn the same thing? Often the case. And you've got to find the thing that it taught you in the way that it might not have been what you did, like in the way that I just said, surrender. So figure out what this is. Basically what I'm talking about now is what I've called your birthing formula. So you whittle down these teachings to one or two words in a sequence, and then that's what you need for menopause. So as another example, my 3 births taught me surrender, trust, and be present. So then I needed to remember that when I started to navigate menopause, and the reason I know I needed, so this is what my experience taught me, and this is what I teach women, and it's fucking amazing, and it works every time. So what I noticed when I started going through menopause was that I started to feel the same way I felt when I was having my first baby. Like,
Wow.
I'll endure this, and I'm going to do whatever I can to avoid feeling what I'm feeling. I didn't want to have HRT because I didn't want to be drugged, but I was trying to think of all the other ways I could avoid it. And then I noticed and I thought, oh, my God, I've done this.
This
before.
old chestnut.
Yeah. So then I realized I had to surrender, which basically meant stop obsessing and trying to change it and whatever, fight it. And then I thought, oh, okay, so now the next one thing I learned was trust. So then I have to trust the process. And I'm quite prepared to trust the process of menopause. It's a process to trust. And then my next teaching was be present. So, if the present moment is actually the only thing that's happening, and also the safest place to be. So my birth taught me to surrender, trust, and be present. So then I needed that for menopause. I needed to surrender, stop obsessing about it and trying to stop it or control it. Then I needed to trust the process, and then I just have to be in the present moment. And then that birthing formula not only works for menopause, it works for anything and everything. So that's really the thing that I focus on helping women with menopause the most, is to help them realize what they already know, what life has already taught them, because that's what they need for their next thing.
And if they haven't given birth and they're going through menopause, would you get them to look back to their menarche or like use a different rite of passage that they have been through to sort of
all the
get
other
the lessons
things
from that?
All the other things they birthed. So it'd be like a career. Yep. So the conception is the idea to become a marketing specialist, for example, just as a suggestion. The pregnancy is the university degree, the process, and then the birth is them as whatever they've trained to be. So the question is, so if the birth is you as an advertising and marketing person, the pregnancy was the uni degree or whatever the training was. So what did that whole thing teach you? So you use those things chronologically. And it works completely same way.
Wow.
And I'm guessing, I don't know, but I'm guessing that what you then learn from menopause is the next thing. And then I'm guessing that that's what you need for death.
Yeah. Wow. Oh, love that. That's so practical as well. Like everyone can just think back and start reflecting on that and doing that. So thank you. That's awesome. I'm going to have to do some journaling when I get off this call.
and also, as you said, the menarche is a huge factor because, and that really impacts how we give birth, whether it's to babies or projects as well. And our relationship with our menstrual cycle, like if you switched off your cycle in whatever way, there's so many of them, whether that's actually or just psychologically, then that costs. There's a payback for that.
Yeah. Wow. Before we wrap up, I want to do TMI.
TMI, we love it. TMI, we love it.
Do you have a TMI story that you feel comfortable sharing with us?
Certainly, and I thought of something to do with menopause, and I didn't know this. I didn't know that this would happen, and I don't actually think it's too much to share because I think everybody needs to know it, but it would be something that a lot of people wouldn't talk about.
Hey, me again. If you'd like to support the potty and you've already given it 5 stars on whatever platform you're listening on, I want to mention that you can buy some really dope merch from the website and get yourself a Labia Lounge tote, tee, togs. Yep, you heard that right. I even have Labia Lounge bathers. Or a cute fanny pack if that'd blow your hair back. So if fashion isn't your passion, though, you can donate to my Buy Me a Coffee donation page, which is actually called Buy Me a Soy Chai Latte, because I'll be the first to admit I'm a bit of a Melbourne cafe tosser like that. And yes, that is my coffee order. You can do a once-off donation or an ongoing membership and sponsor me for as little as 3 fat ones a month. And I also have a Sunroom profile over on the Sunroom app, as I've mentioned. And I also offer one-on-one coaching and online courses that'll help you level up your sex life and relationship with yourself and others in a really big way. So every bit helps because it ain't cheap to put out a sweet podcast into the world every week out of my own pocket. So I will be undyingly grateful if you support me and my biz financially in any of these ways. And if you like, I'll even give you a mental BJ with my mind from the lounge itself. Saucy. And I'll pop the links in the show notes. Thank you. Later.
And 3 other physical changes that happened. So and this happened like well into years after. So it must have been like when the hormones are really getting to the place they're going to stay. The first thing that I noticed was that my nipples changed color.
Oh, wow.
And they went back to like a light pink, which was what they were like before I was fertile.
Wow.
So that was interesting.
Okay. Huh.
And-
Have you spoken to other women and that's happened to them too?
Yeah,
or?
yeah.
Wow.
But it may also have to do with my colouring too. So I mean, I'm not. I'm olive skinned, and maybe that the browning of the nipples. I don't know, but that happened. The other thing that happened is my labia is like half the size. Like the labia shrinks. Now, it shrinks,
but your clit still grows.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not as plump. So the labia there's less of a handful. and pubic hair falls out.
Oh, wow.
I haven't,
like thinning hair.
Yeah. And like I don't even have any hairs on my legs anymore.
Wow. How interesting. Huh. Oh, if you had told me when I, like teenage me, who was crippled by self-consciousness about my body hair, I would have been racing to get to menopause. Would have saved me a lot of laser hair removal in my late teens. Jesus.
Yeah, and I don't know if that happens to everybody or it's just my particular body type, but you know, that's something that happens.
Yeah, wow. Oh, thank you so much for sharing that. That is the most on-brand TMI story because it is exactly like you said, something that, you know, people probably wouldn't use as conversation fodder at the dinner table, but it is important to talk about because how would we know otherwise, you know?
Exactly.
Oh, epic. I've got a tiny little TMI. It's not much of a TMI, but I just thought I'd let you know that I met your son on a dating app years ago, and that's how I know about you. We never met up in person. We just had lots of lovely text conversations. But yeah, he seems like a legend. And then I told my friend who did your shamanic womancraft initiation or journey, and she absolutely adored it. And she's like, oh my God, you've got to marry him. If his mum is Jane, then like, holy shit, you know, that's right up your alley. So funny.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Oh, anyway, I have a little quote that also from Dr. Christian Northrup that I want to end on because it just sort of encompasses what we've been speaking about. She says, whatever we call it, no other stage of a woman's life has as much potential for allowing a woman to understand and tap into her own power as this one. If, that is, she is able to negotiate her way through the general cultural negativity that has surrounded menopause for centuries. These are the years when all of a woman's life experience comes together and can be used for a purpose that suits her. Once a woman understands that the true meaning of menopause has been inverted and degraded, like many other processes of her body, she can reverse this programming and make her way through the rest of her life fortified with purpose, insight, and pleasure. Love that.
Aww.
I feel like, yeah, that's just wrapping up everything that you've spoken about. And I so appreciate your time and your wisdom and your passion. It's just been like, I've been covered in goosebumps like most of the interview, for fuck's sake.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about all of this stuff with you.
Pleasure. Well, I'll put links to your work in the show notes and on the Facebook Labia Lounge group. And Jane has also given us a little freebie ebook, which I'll link. So highly recommend checking out Jane's work and following her and just getting around this stuff. It doesn't matter if you're 20 or if you're actually approaching perimenopause or if you're postmenopause. Like, this is such valuable information that I think should just be a lot more well known, and everyone should be learning about it and talking about it. So yeah, please share this episode because it's so jam-packed with value. So thank you so much, Jane.
Thank you, Freya, and good on you for doing this work. You know, you're filling in a really, really important role of helping people, especially women, like actually understand what's going on and to dig through all the bullshit and find the truth. So I really want to say thank you for doing that.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, love it. Goodbye, everyone. And that's it, darling hearts. Thank you for stopping by the Labia Lounge. Your bum groove in the couch will be right where you left it, just waiting for you to sink back in for some more double L action next time. And in the meantime, if you'd be a dear and subscribe, share this episode, or leave a review on iTunes, then you can pat yourself on the snatch, because that, my dear, is a downright act of sex-positive feminist activism. And you'd be supporting my vision to educate, empower, demystify, and destigmatize with this here podcast. Also, I'm always open to feedback, topic ideas that you'd love to hear covered, or guest suggestions. So feel free to get in touch via my website at freyagraph.com or say hey over on Insta. My handle is Freya_graph_YMT, and I seriously hope you're following me on there, because damn, we have fun. We have fun. Anyway, later labial legends. I'll see you next time.